So when you're writing fiction, one thing that you're trying to do is have the narrator disappear into the background, almost like they're not really there, even though we're aware that somebody is telling the story. So talking about words that we want to avoid typically in our narrative, again, there are words that are strongly deictic, which I don't even know if I said that right. That's a Greek term that essentially means pointing, words that point, and in particular we're talking about words that strongly point to what we would call a temporal center. Temporal meaning time, or words that point to, I'll do this circle here, a spatial center. So words that point to a place in space. So we think we have our timeline of our story, our narration of what's going on. Well, again, we have a narrator of our story, and that's somebody that exists outside of our story, that's telling our story kind of from a bird's eye view, or even kind of a boots on the ground view if we're trying to give a point of view of a particular character in the story. But we still have a narrator, right? The moment we say he said, right, or she went to the blah blah blah, right, we have the idea or the existence of narration in the story. And unless we're writing strictly in the first person, right, or we're giving point of view through a first person narrative, the narrator's not a character in the story. They're somebody outside the story. But there are certain words that have strong deictic characteristic to them that will point to a temporal center, and that temporal center essentially belongs to the speaker, not the character in the story. So again, examples for a temporal center would be a word like today. Today establishes this point in time, right? If I say today at this in my narrative right here, I'm creating this temporal center, and because the person speaking is the narrator, well, who does that temporal center belong to? It belongs to the narrator, and that actually creates a problem for me as the reader because it's pulling the narrator into the story. It's like, why are we getting the narrator's point of time reference here? Is everything in relation to where the narrator is, in the story or something like that? So we don't want a word like today in our basic narration of the story, right? Or a spatial word be like here. Other temporal words, right, like yesterday and tomorrow, right, but also the word ago. If I say like 5 years ago, that word is strongly deictic, right, and is creating this temporal center here. This is our point of reference now according to the narrator. We've brought the narrator into this point for some reason, and we don't want the narrator there, right? Or if we said last year, right, that's be something else we might say that strongly establishes a temporal center, right? Or another word that for spatial center that can be problematic is sometimes the word this, right? If I say this book in the story, right, it's pointing to very close location. We've geographically brought that narrator into our timeline, into our story, into our location, right, when he's not supposed to be there. Whereas it would be different if I said that book, right? In the same way that it would be different if we said there instead of here, right? There fits an outside perspective, and our narrator is outside the story, so the word there works, while the word here doesn't, right? It pulls our narrator into the story. So just to give a quick example, right? If I say tomorrow they would reach the city, well, now I've created something that's problematic for my reader, because they're like, who's tomorrow? Who's tomorrow are we talking about? And they know we're trying to talk about the character, but it feels like the narrator because that word actually belongs to the narrator because the narrator is speaking to us. Whereas if I just said by tomorrow they would reach the city. Oops, can't even see what I'm writing now. There's probably a little typo in there. Yep, a little typo. But this maintains the character's point of view by tomorrow. So there are a lot of words that are deictic, but not strongly deictic, in a sense that they fit well within a sequence of events, right? By tomorrow just means that from whatever point we are in the story, we're making reference to something just ahead in the story, right? Or if we said before, the blah, 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 we're just making reference to something that happened just previously, but we're staying within this sequence of events, this timeline, from the character's point of view. Whereas words like today, ago, last year, they belong to the narrator because the narrator's a speaker, and they pull the narrator in because they relate to a now, right? Those relate to a now. And that now belongs to the speaker. The speaker is the narrator. Interestingly, though, the word now itself is one that's not so terribly strongly deictic. You can use the word now without pulling in the narrator, and it just kind of establishes you at whatever point you're in already, right? But it's not, usually it's not pulling the narrator in. So anyway, as you're writing your story, one thing you want to do to immerse your reader is avoid words that are going to pull in your narrator. If you want to use words like today, ago, that kind of stuff, it needs to fit in within the point of view of the character. It needs to belong to the character, so it needs to be inside dialogue, right? Dialogue belongs to the speaker, whoever's speaking, right? Today I blah, whatever, right? That can belong to the character. Or, if we had thought dialogue, right? If we put that in italics, and that's what our character is thinking, then we can use those strongly deictic words that are pointing. But otherwise, we want to avoid them.